Welcome back to Political Paradigms. How has your week been, Theo?
Better than the Tories.
Well, on last week's podcast, it's Toby, by the way. On last week's podcast, Theo said if the Conservatives lost both the Mid Bedfordshire and the Tamworth by-elections, the Conservative Party would be headed for, what was the word, Theo?
Electoral annihilation, I think, was the word I used.
Okay. Would you like to read me some of the stats of what occurred in these two by-elections, Theo?
Sure. So, in the Mid Bedfordshire by-election, Labour won, overturning a post-war record 24,664 majority. And they also won the constituency of Tamworth and overturned a 19,600 majority. Sorry.
Now, Tamworth there's an interesting thing about Tamworth. So that was a seat that was held by New Labour. So on a level, it's like, oh, it's just swinging back. But actually, that area of the Midlands, I don't know if you know much about this, but the Midlands, the Tories were thinking this would be their new base. Like, over the last decade, the Midlands has really gone much more heavily to the Conservatives than the nation, if that makes sense. And Tamworth it's gone the other way. Mid Bedfordshire, not had a Labour MP ever. I think it's been Tory since the 30s. You don't get many constituencies that were Conservative pre-Churchill. That's how far back it goes. The swings we saw are directly comparable to swings in the 1992-97 Parliament. The swings Tony Blair was achieving. Theo, would you like to take me through some of the excuses you've heard from Conservatives about these results?
Yes. The most common excuse that I've heard is that it's a by-election, and so it's not indicative of what will happen in a general election because it's got lower turnout. I mean, there's some truth in that, but essentially with a by-election, you can extrapolate the result out to a wider group of voters, and that will be close to what you'll get in a general election.
Which we'll do that in a moment, and that is
that is pretty shocking.
But the other thing worth bearing in mind about these results is, as well as that being the case, the drop in turnout is almost directly the same as the drop in turnout that Tony Blair saw in his by-elections. So going by these two results, and according to Professor John Curtis, we're heading for 1997 style Labour landslide, or worse. Theo, is that plausible? Is that possible? It doesn't quite feel real, does it? Do you think we're underestimating how well Labour's going to do?
Look, I know we all see Keir Starmer as, a man who can win an election and lead a government, but I've been saying since episode 1 of this pod, he's not Blair, he's not that guy, he wants to be that guy, but he just doesn't have the kind of that charisma and that technocratic machine. However, all the indicators, all the statistical indicators and all the anecdotal evidence is pointing towards him having potentially a bigger majority than Blair. And yes, it's very hard for our little brains to comprehend, but the numbers are there, the trends are there. I mean, there's nothing indicating that can't happen. The conferences, the by-elections, everything.
Do you think, I was thinking about this the other day, I think I might write an article about it. Do you think there's anything that could save the Conservative Party? Like, is there any event that can occur that ends with them winning a majority in the next 12 months? Because I can see stuff, meaning Labour end up with a small majority, or, Keir Starmer is a weak Prime Minister, he doesn't have as good a result as he thinks, but I can't see a chain of events that leads from here to Rishi Sunak as Prime Minister in 2025.
No, I mean, that's not what the Tories ever sold themselves as. They never sold themselves as the party of overnight results. They sold themselves as the party of, long-term strategic thinking, organic change. That's not going to happen in the next 12 months. Honestly, I know this is getting quite dark, but I think the only thing that could save the Tories now is some kind of tragic event abroad or here that triggers a military response from the Tory government, and that always leads to support for the current government as the country becomes more united in a kind of post 9/11 manner.
This is it, and I was considering this recently because obviously we've got some very concerning things happening in the Middle East, and it's not likely, but I guess it's within the plausible realm of possibility. On some level, there could be some kind of British intervention. In that event, I assume Rishi Sunak would see a substantial popularity boost. would it be enough to overturn the Labour lead entirely?
I don't think so. I think it would have to be something directly concerning the UK. If we
Yeah.
got involved in the Israel-Gaza conflict directly, it would be as part of a wider NATO force, and Keir Starmer would probably be completely behind what we did. And so Rishi Sunak couldn't claim it as his victory. And honestly, if he did try to, it would be extremely bad taste given just the extent of the horror that we've seen in that region recently that's going on as we speak.
Yeah, and basically a bipartisan tone from both parties, which has kind of dampened the political noise over the last week or so, in a way that sort of that it felt like the election campaign was sort of gearing up, and now obviously it's sort of toning down again for the next little while. But I think we're basically, so what you're saying is we're at a scenario where it would literally have to be something that none of us want to happen, which is something that would directly impact the safety of people living in the UK. That kind of level of threat.
Yes, and I'm not willing to say that I think that they would intentionally do something like that to shore up their electoral performance.
No, this is one of those sort of hand of God things where it's like we're looking at things that are like so beyond the pale of anything we could foresee. It's sort of.
Yes, and I will note that even in this one scenario that could save the Tories, it would not last. I mean, okay, so George W. Bush saw the highest approval ratings in history, 94% after 9/11. Within 3 years, it was down to 24%, for a variety of reasons due to his response and other things, the lowest in history. So the one thing that could save the Tories wouldn't last, and it's unlikely to happen. And you get my point.
Voters are now, in my opinion, in time for a change mode. And there's very little, even if the economy improves, it will probably just dent the defeat kind of thing. And actually, if you want to sort of look at, right now, the backdrop in some ways should be, ever so slightly positive for Sunak. So inflation's coming down. The government is projecting leadership on the world stage. And there haven't been sort of massive fiascos, right? The government isn't flailing, like incompetently unable to sort of manage things day to day, anything like that, which there was a real sense of that last year at various points, and even earlier this year. So in that backdrop, they're still 20 points behind, give or take. And looking at next year, there are now credible forecasts of a recession. So throw a recession in the mix. Is it going to get worse?
As a recession can certainly will certainly make it worse in the short term. I think even a period of kind of stability and kind of just neutral performance by the government also won't save them. And if you think of the major government, nothing super chaotic except maybe the exchange rate mechanism crisis. Nothing super chaotic, but it was the memory of the inflation and the unemployment and the miners' strikes all the way back in the 80s that prompted them to be thrown out in 1997. So voters do have, a memory of recent events, and Partygate and the Truss administration. I mean, that was literally a year ago. The Pincher scandal, that was last year. And if they can remember the 80s in 1997, they can sure remember 2021 in 2024.
Would you like a seat estimate for if a general election result was in line with the swing to Labour in the Tamworth by-election?
Go ahead.
Labour would have 537 seats. The Liberal Democrats would be the official opposition on 46 seats. And the Conservative Party would be in third place, just ahead of the SNP on 29 seats.
I think at that point they'd be happy to be ahead of the SNP.
Oh, it's not.
Look, I mean, again, it sounds crazy, but this is statistically, mathematically the likely outcome. And I'm not saying it will happen. And obviously, there's so many variables and factors that go into it. But to an extent, you can distill it down to the numbers because these trends repeat themselves over and over again in politics. And it's just crazy to hear that, honestly.
You have a pattern now. So you had like a 20% swing in Selby and Ainsty in Yorkshire. You had a 20% swing against the SNP in Scotland. You've had Mid Bedfordshire. You've had Tamworth. Like wherever you go in the country, people are like swarming to the Labour Party in a way that seems like the last 10 years of British politics. Everything has told you should like not underestimate the Conservative Party and not overestimate the Labour Party. But it seems to have turned on its head. Labour have become sort of an election-winning force again.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and also, if you think about it rationally, like Labour's natural base will obviously Labour's natural base who turn to the Tory party, in the red wall seats will definitely turn back to them. The increasingly strained middle class, the traditional Tory voters, increasingly will also turn to Labour. That kind of trend of people getting older and getting more conservative, which has already been diminishing, has that anti-trend has been accelerated. Like that, if you really think about it, the amount of groups now who will be motivated to vote for the Tory party in light of the last 13 years, especially post-COVID, is incredibly small.
One more look at the swing before we move on from this. I think
Or
what it,
what if I'm also going to add again, if you think about like the business management class, wealthy individuals who donate to the Tory party, they're flocking to the Labour conference, they're flocking to Starmer as well.
Oh, you're right. I saw a great quote. It was Ben Walker from Britain Elects. I don't know if you're familiar with Ben Walker, but he was talking about Labour conference, saying he overheard some people at Labour conference basically going, like, it's a load of people from the city. Here's what it says. It says, saw so many city boys at Labour conference, just as indicative that money sees Labour as the next government. One of them asked me awkwardly, are we all comrades now? As they down some white wine.
Oh my God. Well, there you go. There you have it.
That's where we are right now. So ministers that would obviously statistically that crazy result I spoke about is what we're on course for. In reality, obviously the Conservative base will rally and they'll have some kind of they'll be in the hundreds, right, 150, whatever. And it could obviously improve for them, and then, we're in a smaller Labour majority. All these things, very plausible. We're not saying that crazy result is going to happen, but if that kind of swing were kept up, if I have a look at some of these results,
even if you knock off a couple hundred from that predicted figure, that's still a sizable majority, even greater than the ones the Tories have now, which allowed them to push through Brexit and all the legislation they wanted. Like, maybe not an elective dictatorship, but still a government that can pass bills.
Jeremy Hunt would lose his seat. James Cleverly would lose his seat. Suella Braverman would lose her seat. Michael Gove would lose his seat. Rishi Sunak would lose his seat. Oliver Dowden would lose his seat. Penny Mordaunt would lose her seat. I can go on. Crazy. All right? Crazy. Basically, the whole cabinet would be wiped out.
They'd all have to be moved to the House of Lords. That was the plan for Boris Johnson if he lost his seat in 2019.
Throwbacks to Alex Douglas Hume. Yeah. Leader of the opposition can't ask questions. They're in the Lords. Yeah.
They can shout across the hall, I guess.
Just crazy stuff. Crazy. Yeah, and we actually don't have a clear constitutional provision for what happens if a Prime Minister loses their seat, by the way. That is... it's not clear.
No. I mean, our constitution is just good people doing good things. And look at politics in this country. It's full of good people doing good things. Don't worry about it.
Well, indeed. Now, on to our next topic. Coming up, stay tuned. We're going to be talking about the date of the next general election. It's our favourite thing to speculate about.
Ooh.
Both of us were terribly wrong the other week when we speculated. So I'll be delving into that soon. I want to talk about this book by Ben Riley Smith, The Right to Rule. 13 years, 5 prime ministers, and the implosion of the Tories. So, I was looking through this book. I've read it now. It sort of takes you through some key moments in the reign of...
Sorry, could we get a bit of background on the author?
Ben Riley Smith. That's it's a good shout, Theo. You've got to sharpen up my my answering. So he's the Daily Telegraph's political editor. He's covered Scottish Parliament, Westminster and Washington. He's interviewed the last 5 prime ministers, covered elections, referendums, and he's been shortlisted twice for political journalism at the British Journalism Awards. It's quite a good resume. Andrew Marr liked the book. Ed Balls liked the book. John Sopel liked the book. Pick your endorsement, Theo. So
I do like Andrew Marr. He writes great history books. But yeah, all those pundit endorsements, good credentials.
So it starts by talking about the Tories in opposition and how the coalition comes about. It talks about the 2015 election, talks about Theresa May and her sort of failures with a majority, then the nightmare without a majority, talks about Johnson coming in, talks about the failures and the squandered opportunity of the Johnson government, talks about the collapse of the Johnson government, talks about Liz Truss in the aptly named chapter 49 Days, and it talks about Rishi Sunak. Can you guess what Rishi Sunak's chapter is called?
Oh God, you're putting me on the spot here. So wait, what was the Boris Johnson chapter called, just for some perspective?
Um, you've got three for him. You've got Regicide and Renewal, Squandered Opportunities, and Downfall.
Hmm.
Liz Truss's 49 Days.
Okay, I'm gonna say the face of defeat.
It's Comeback Kid.
Oh, okay. Well, it's a Telegraph after all.
Yeah. And it does end by basically saying, like, can he swim to the surface in time? Probably not. And that's how it ends. That's basically the end of the book. And it's like, can he break the surface of the water in time? He probably can't. The end. But few insights in this book. I found the coverage, Theo, it takes you through like the phone calls between Nick Clegg and Cameron and Brown after the 2010 election.
Oh yeah.
Gordon Brown picks up the phone and goes, according to this book, "You're right, Nick. Congratulations. We've got a comprehensive offer for you, double what the Tories are offering you," and then just speaks at him for about half an hour without letting him speak.
Sounds about right.
David Cameron sort of befriends him more, and it seems that the personal dynamics, which I think you've said before, were possibly what led to coalition with the Labour Party, with the Conservatives.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not old enough to remember, but I know that from Cameron's biography, the period after the 2010 general election wasn't actually clear who was going to form a government. It was who could, get in good leagues with Clegg.
Yeah, David Cameron apparently sat in the kitchen at one point and was like, "I'm not going to be Prime Minister, am I?" He thought Gordon Brown had done it, but he hadn't. Very interesting dynamics, actually. I suppose it's the closest to one of those like crazy minority Labour government scenarios that pundits always talk about, right? It's the closest we got to that.
Mm.
And then, yeah, obviously all the Johnson stuff is sort of off the wall. I think the big tragedy actually might be the two squandered opportunities were Theresa May squandered the opportunity to be a transformative Prime Minister, and then Johnson did. Do you think that's a personal failure, or do you think there is something in the Conservative Party at the moment that they can't take opportunity when it presents itself?
I mean, I'd refute that straight away. I mean, Theresa May simply didn't have the backing of her party or her cabinet or parliament, and Johnson had to deal with the COVID. Johnson had to find a solution to the COVID pandemic, which obviously took up a lot of his time. So I'd actually just say that's quite an unfair assessment.
But the thing with Theresa May is she was initially very powerful. And if she'd won that election big, she'd probably be Prime Minister right now, right?
Yeah, but I think if she was planning anything big, obviously her motive for the 2017 general election was to consolidate her majority. So if she had any big plans, it would have been waiting for after then. Obviously, that's not how it went. But and of course Johnson, pretty much the pandemic started a month after he won his majority, or a month after Brexit. It was the day Brexit was passed
Yeah.
that the first COVID case came to the UK. I mean, it was symbolic.
I do think if you
It
were
was like, there's your one achievement.
if you were Johnson, you would kind of curse fate, wouldn't you? Because
Yeah.
without the pandemic, do you think his personal flaws would have still brought him down, or would he still be in office right now?
I mean, I think it was the pandemic that definitely highlighted them to the public, magnified them. Who knows? I think he could have made some with that majority, with the backing of the party after Brexit, he definitely could have passed some big legislation and some big policies that gained him support. And I think that could have easily overshadowed whatever potential scandals came up. And most of the scandals that did come up were related to COVID. So I think he easily could have still been in office with an 80-seat majority.
Yeah, in many ways, I suppose, the chain of events that lead us towards Prime Minister Keir Starmer are some of the least probable events that you can conceive of, right? It's like...
Let's start from the beginning. Where does this begin?
Well, I suppose in many ways, does it begin in the Labour... Well, I don't think he'd have become Labour leader without Brexit, and I also don't think he'd become Labour leader if the sort of Brexit policy he advocated hadn't harmed the Labour Party in the 2019 election. So
Absolutely.
it's like there's just a long string of things, right, that lead to it.
I think if we're gonna say his victory is inevitable, it's a mix of the declining popularity of the Tories, Brexit, and Corbyn, and obviously Corbyn converged with Brexit in the 2019 election. Many argued that he would have been a lot more popular had Brexit not been a kind of obligatory issue to discuss. He could have focused on the big issues that he cared about. That's just an argument some people make. And obviously that led to Keir Starmer becoming the leader, and then COVID just kind of essentially accelerating the Tory downfall, leading us to where we are now.
Because I think he wouldn't have become leader without that scale of defeat. So, let's say the 2019 election was fought on like slightly more favourable ground for Labour. Jeremy Corbyn was very unpopular by that point. They lose by less. Maybe the left in the Labour Party is able to elect another leader. It was kind of the shock.
Maybe it's just we need this kind of leftism, but not such a dinosaur. So we'll have, Rebecca Long Bailey or something.
Whereas when it's like an 80-seat Tory majority, Labour below 200 seats, it's like
there's no room for argument that this can be changed and adopted.
This project failed. It has to die. And that was like, without that sort of behind Keir Starmer, I don't think any of what has happened would have happened.
I agree.
So, in many ways, Keir Starmer owes Boris Johnson his premiership on many levels.
In hindsight.
Jeremy Corbyn, Boris Johnson. I suppose if Ed Miliband had won, Keir Starmer would have become an MP under a Miliband government.
Oh, that's a good point, actually. I guess, again, Corbyn is an undeniable factor in Keir Starmer's upcoming victory. Ed Miliband is the reason Corbyn became leader, because he was able to drop the fees for membership, and so a bunch of young people joined and voted Corbyn. And so, thanks, Ed, I guess you did end up achieving something for Labour.
This is it. And the funny thing is, Ed Miliband is probably going to be a senior cabinet minister in the next
go away
Labour government. Get ready for it.
God.
Chaos with Ed Miliband on a national scale. Coming soon. Well, I mean, Starmer can appoint who he wants when he's got a 400-seat majority or something ridiculous.
Yeah.
All right. Let's talk about the next general election. So, was I predicting... What was I saying? Was I leaning towards May when we talked about this?
Yeah, I think so. And I was leaning towards, I think, October, but I had some kind of... Well, my reasoning was mostly related to inflation, but I don't think that's going to be a factor anymore. As I was saying earlier, I don't think anything in the economy could impact the upcoming election.
Now, let's look at this article. So a few things have happened. In the wake of this result, there's been a lot of murmuring. And there's been an article from the Institute for Government, who I love. Ben Paxton has put this out. When will the next general election be? So Parliament can dissolve 5 years after it was formed. So the Prime Minister, the latest date the Prime Minister can call the next general election. Theo, you get extra points if you have any idea when it is. When's the latest it can be called?
That would be December 12th, 2024.
It's actually the 17th, but you're very, very close. December the 17th, 2024. Now, that election is... Right. Logically, an election over Christmas makes no sense, right? An election held in January 2025. But if you think you're going to lose, do you want to stay Prime Minister till the last possible moment you can? And just build a legacy and then lose?
Honestly, not necessarily. But I think with Rishi Sunak we can safely say yes.
So you're saying if you were Sunak, you'd accept your fate sooner?
Yes, I would.
Okay. So Parliament could be dissolved. If they literally legally refuse to dissolve, it would be the 17th. If they want to hold it on a Thursday, as we always do, they'd need to dissolve on the 12th, like you said. Manifestos would be expected between Christmas and New Year. Okay? Get your head around that.
That's the time everyone loves just poring over documents like they do at work.
Campaigning and canvassing right through Christmas. And polling day on the 23rd of January, 2025. Does that strike you as at all realistic?
I think, in spite of everything that's happened, I do not think anybody would try and hold a general election during Christmas or have polling day at a time such that bulk of the campaigning occurs at Christmas. I think that's very unrealistic. So I think they'd have to have it sooner.
On the bright side, it means we get 14 months of non-stop speculation about the election. on this podcast.
Yippee.
Yeah. So yeah, latest general election can take place. Campaigning over Christmas. Another thing worth mentioning: the NHS is in its worst state at that time of year, so that's not going to go well. And my assumption would be the public would probably punish a January election. They'd probably resent it. I don't think they'd be very pleased with it. So that is actually something that is being discussed, and a number of political journalists think this is the inevitable date of the election. George Osborne thinks it's inevitable. Several other political figures. It's been in quite a lot of the papers, and a lot of the BBC sort of journalists were saying, basically after the by-election results, okay, it's going to be January 2025. So, like,
and that's for the sole reason that Sunak will want to stay in office as late as he legally can.
It's the theory of wait for something to turn up. Maybe some crazy event will save us between now and then.
Look, he could even push that further. He could just refuse to hold it before. It could go to the Supreme Court, and then he could do a Boris Johnson and claim that the Supreme Court is an enemy of the people or something. I
think, as far as I understand the Constitution, it will Parliament will dissolve against the Prime Minister's will on the 17th of December.
If it can vote, I mean, I did A-level politics. I'm an expert on this.
Of course, no, but of course.
From what I understand, if Parliament refuses to resolve, the Supreme Court can say that's unlawful. But because it's Parliament is the sovereign entity. No one can tell Parliament what to do. Then there's nothing they can do. But at that point, we have a constitutional crisis, and we're going into very complex, uncharted territory.
We're in, yes, and I don't think Rishi Sunak is the kind of politician that would attempt such a feat.
No, absolutely not. And I think there's also the chance that the Tory party would straight up just rebel.
Oh, they wouldn't have it. No, you've got enough. Put it this way, you have a majority of the House of Commons that believes in liberal democracy.
Yes, I think we can still, to an extent, say that.
So, in the event that a Prime Minister refuses, we can get worried when a government has a majority that doesn't believe in elections. Then we have trouble. If 326 MPs want to stop elections, would you say at that point we may become a dictatorship?
I think, again, at that point, we're in uncharted waters and anything could happen. So,
other dates that are being looked at, of course, there's the May scenario. How much money would you put on May? Not very much, I would say. I don't think that's going to happen.
No, that doesn't really give them any time to wait for something miraculous good to happen.
You've got October the 10th. You could call the election on the 5th of September and sort of skip the party conferences, hold it on the 10th of October. I think up until now, that's what a lot of journalists have been sort of operating on the assumption of, right? That kind of time. Then there's the sort of repeat of 2019. Call it early November, hold it 12th of December. In a way, I think December may be underpriced as a possibility. I don't know what you think, Theo.
I mean, there's the fact that they won an election at that time last time, so none of the potential mitigating factors, such as when people want to go out, it being too dark, people being ill, blah blah blah, that's a non-issue because they've won elections like that before, so it works, right?
Yes.
The people who want to vote for them will come out and vote for them. There's no question of that.
Although apparently a lot of activists in both parties are begging their MPs, please do it before sort of winter time kicks in. Let us campaign in the light, as it were. Do you think they'll pay any attention to? Maybe they won't.
Well, look, there's one extremely important thing that I think you've missed, which is that if they hold it near Christmas, then Rishi Sunak can do a Love Actually advert, which single-handedly won Johnson an 80-seat majority.
Well, indeed. And it can be him and his wife, and there can be some kind of, yeah, you're right. Well, do you think Keir Starmer will do a reading mean comments video like Jeremy Corbyn did during the 2019 election?
Honestly, I don't know how Starmer's going to approach the whole campaigning thing.
No.
Okay, because let's be honest, like Starmer and Sunak, just personality-wise, are much kind of less eccentric than Johnson and Corbyn. I mean, you had Johnson with. Did you remember the lo-fi Boris wave beats to relax and chill to? And it was like lo-fi songs with like Boris Johnson's voice saying "Get Brexit done," and it was on the Tory Party channel, like stuff like that.
That's a deep cut. That is a deep cut. Do you remember the clotted cream? And he was just sat like putting cream on like a scone, and all the journalists were asking like, "What are you putting on your scone, Prime Minister?" That was just like, I don't know why.
Yeah. Yeah, and of course we can't forget the forklift truck video breaking the deadlock when he drove through the wall. That was pretty funny.
Indeed. Jeremy Corbyn going on. I don't know. You're choosing Conservatives. I'm choosing. I guess we're just representing. Like, yeah, I'm remembering Labour stuff. You're remembering Tory stuff.
I know. I remember Corbyn's like fireside chat video.
Yeah. And do you also remember Jeremy Corbyn going on this morning and being pressed vociferously to apologise for anti-Semitism by none other than Philip Schofield, which was a surreal experience.
Okay. Yeah, maybe in hindsight, Corbyn did look better in that interview.
But also, just what was surreal to me about that moment was like Holly and Phil like aggressively grilling a politician about a serious issue. Just it's kind of an out of body moment. I was like, is this happening on This Morning?
Oh, so much has changed.
So much has changed. Do you think they'll both go on This Morning during the election and get grilled?
I mean, Sunak tends to kind of avoid interviews in the same way Johnson did. I think there will be as few interviews as they can manage. I mean, a lot of politicians seem to kind of take the payoff that it's better to not show up for an interview than to be embarrassed and have it played thousands of times on social media. And there's plenty to question him about. So probably not.
Head-to-head debates?
Head-to-head debate. I think they've got to have a head-to-head debate. I think no matter what's happened, it's become a staple of the election, right?
Yeah.
So him not showing up for a head-to-head debate to kind of just put what I just said on its head. Yes, for him not showing up for a head-to-head debate would be more dramatic.
Johnson Corbyn was possibly the most presidential campaign we've had because they were the first to do a real head-to-head debate, weren't they? One-on-one. And that was how the whole campaign was framed. It was sort of Corbyn. It was Boris.
Yes, absolutely.
I think it'll be even more this time, right? Starmer Sunak will be heading their parties.
Again, I think Starmer has kind of Blair's technocratic edge, but less of the charisma. I mean, Blair was extremely presidential. I think Starmer's aiming for that. And again, Sunak, they're just, both of them, then their personalities are not as large as Corbyn and Johnson. But I think they could certainly try to make it like that. But I think Sunak knows he's not the winner of the election. And even Starmer, yes, he's doing really well. Yes, he's leading a very successful party, but it's not all down to his abilities and his efforts, is it?
No. The party is carrying Starmer to a landslide majority more than Starmer's carrying the party in many ways.
Yes.
I think that's it. I think this is the longest podcast we've done. That's it for this week. What on earth do you think is going to happen? Well, I'll tell you what's going to happen the next week. Me and Theo are going down to Parliament. So I assume we might have some clips to play on next week's pod.
Bring your microphone.
You know what? I can't bring my podcasting microphone. We can do voice memos on our phones, and
yeah, I think just put your phone on record, hide it in your pocket, talk to these politicians if we're not recording, and then we'll have some very, very spicy stuff to share.
Are we aiming to at least hear from Labour and the Tories?
I think one Labour, one Tory.
Do you want a Lib Dem in there?
Are there any to put in there?
Do you think we can find Ian Blackford? I want to chat to Ian Blackford.
I'd like to know what he's up to now. He's not absolutely demolishing the Prime Minister every single week at PMQs.
Yeah, if you've noticed at PMQs now, often the SNP question is just, does the Prime Minister agree? And then an attack on Labour, which is quite telling.
I mean, Ian Blackford, he really took the fight to the Tories, didn't he?
He did indeed. Just one of those funny little eras of parliamentary politics. All the BBC Parliament viewers were very sad when Ian Blackford stepped down. All right, Theo, thank you very much, and I'll speak to you next week.
See you then.